I stumbled on this when I was working in the World Bank, big bureaucracy. And how did I get there? Well, I was actually born in Sydney, Australia. I grew up there. I studied psychology and law in Sydney, and good stuff, yeah. And I worked in a law office in Sydney as a lawyer, and then I went to Oxford University in England and studied some more law, and then I came to Washington, D.C., and I joined the World Bank. And I was a very left-brain, analytic kind of person. Clear, crisp, succinct, bottom line, that was me. And as you know, big organizations love that kind of person. So I climbed up the managerial ladder in the World Bank. And by February 1996, I was actually the director of the Africa region. Now, the Africa region handles about a third of the operations in the World Bank, so I'm beginning to think, hey, this is a pretty important kind of position. But then, as things happen in big organizations, the scene abruptly changed. The president of the World Bank suddenly died, and my boss unexpectedly retired, and somebody else was appointed to my position. See, things not going too well for me now in the World Bank. So I went to see the top management and asked them, do you have anything in mind for me? They said, not really. You know, it happens in big organizations. But I pressed them a bit, and eventually they said, why don't you go and look into information? Now, February 1996, information in the World Bank had the status of like the garage or the cafeteria. So I was not being offered a promotion here. I was being sent to Siberia. But I was kind of interested in information, and I went to look into information, and I saw a scene probably familiar to many of you. We were drowning in information all over the place, couldn't find anything. I mean, a real mess, and we were wasting a ton of money on this stuff, and obviously we had to clean this mess up. But if we cleaned it up, we would still be the same kind of clunky, slow-moving, old-fashioned public sector lending organization. And people all around the world were asking, do we actually need a slow-moving public sector lending organization when the private sector is now providing all of this finance to developing countries? Why don't we close the World Bank down? 50 years is enough. Let's put this whole organization out of its misery. We do not need this organization anymore. So simply making this organization more efficient, saving it some money wasn't going to solve our problem. We actually had to find a different role in life.
When Steve Denning teaches leadership and innovation, he speaks from decades of experience of conceiving and inspiring change in some of the world's most difficult organizational settings.
So I had another thought. I said, why don't we share our knowledge? We in the World Bank had tremendous depth and breadth of expertise in the organization. We had all sorts of different fields: agriculture, banking, finance, education, health, world expert. I mean, tremendous depth and breadth of expertise. But it was very difficult in February 1996 to find this out. If you knew somebody in the World Bank and you knew what they knew and you knew them well enough to have lunch with them, yeah, then you could find out what the World Bank knew about a subject. But if you didn't have that kind of access, you're out of luck. And if you're outside the organization, didn't really stand a chance. So I said, why don't we reverse that? Why don't we make it very easy for anyone to find out what we know? Then we could actually be a pretty interesting organization, even an exciting organization. Let's become a knowledge-sharing organization. And I thought this was a pretty good idea, so I started trying to persuade my colleagues, let's become a knowledge-sharing organization. And my colleagues had a very clear answer for me. They said, Steve, this is the World Bank. We're a bank. We lend money. That's what pays your salary. Keep your eye on the ball. We are a lending organization. Didn't seem to work too well. So I said, well, how do consultants persuade organizations to change? Well, as you know, they have these wonderful 2x2 matrices, these boxes and arrows, going like this. And so I got out some charts and showed them to the World Bank, and everyone looked dazed, couldn't understand what I was talking about. And then I thought, well, let's try something else. Let's try reason. So I tried things like a definition of knowledge management from a famous website, Brint.com. Knowledge management caters to the critical issues of organizational adaptation and blah, blah, blah. It's actually a wonderful definition. Only one thing wrong with it. It takes you 2 years studying the subject before you realize why it's a wonderful definition. So it was a way of communicating the idea, knowledge management totally useless. Then I stumbled on something else. I'd be talking about the future and the future of the World Bank and what's it going to be like. Well, I said it's going to be like today. Let me tell you about something that happened just a few months ago. In June 1995, a health worker in a little village in Zambia in Africa logged onto the website for the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, and got the answer to a question on how to treat malaria. Now, that was June 1995, not June 2015. This wasn't the capital Zambia was a little place 600 kilometers away. And this is not a rich country. This is Zambia, one of the poorest countries in the world. But you know, the most important part of this picture for us in the World Bank? The World Bank is not in this picture. The World Bank does not have its knowledge organized to share with all the millions of people who make decisions about poverty. But just imagine if it was. Just imagine if we got organized. Think what an organization we could become. And yeah, that started to resonate first with staff, and then managers, and then senior managers, and then the president of the World Bank heard about it, and he said, right, let's do it. He went to the annual meeting of the World Bank, October 1, 1996, here in Washington, D.C., huge public occasion, 170 finance ministers, all their entourages, massive public occasion. He announced, we are going to do this. We are going to share our knowledge with the world. We are going to become the knowledge bank. And when the people who'd sent me to Siberia just a few months before this announcement heard this announcement, they were horrified because this was the worst-case scenario. This was the nightmare they'd been worried about because now the man from Siberia was back. And not only back, but has somehow managed to co-opt a whole group of staff and managers and now even the president to pursue this crazy idea of becoming a knowledge-sharing organization. Now, this wasn't the end of the war. This was just the beginning of the war. This is when they started to use real bullets instead of rubber bullets, because now there was a risk this thing might actually happen. And I found, to my astonishment, that the only thing that enabled me to prevail in the battles that took place over the next 4 years was the ability to tell a story. And one of those occasions was in September 1998, in the fall of 1998. Some of you may remember that people thought the world was on the brink of a global financial crisis. Russia had just defaulted, Brazil was teetering on the brink, Japan was in recession, East Asia was in ruins, the currencies, the stock market were gyrating wildly. People were beginning to say, we may be on the brink of a global financial crisis. And the traditionalists inside the World Bank said, wow, that's terrific. Now the world needs a lending organization again. Now we can go back to doing what we love doing best. We can go back to lending money.
Steve Denning is a best-selling author and internationally known consultant. Steve is a former World Bank senior executive who now works with the world's top organizations, helping everyone from CEOs to frontline employees survive, thrive, and innovate.